Hello to our viewers and listeners, and welcome to this first ever virtual fireside chat from ThreatWatch. I am your host for today, Ketan Nilangikar. Our super special guest today is the CEO of RSA, Rohit Ghai. Rohit has been president of RSA when it was part of Dell till last year and has recently taken over as group CEO at RSA. I've had the pleasure of working with Rohit in the past, and he has been a tremendous mentor and friend for us for some time now, and it is a great honor and a pleasure to have him as our first guest. Welcome to the conversation, Rohit.
Absolutely, Ketan. Good to be here, and excited to talk about all things cybersecurity and whatever else we want to talk about.
Well, great. Well, that's perfect. So our topic for today is third party and supply chain security, which, as it turns out, is a major concern, especially in the light of some recent breach events that have happened as a result of this. So let's just jump right into it, Rohit, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, the first question I had in mind was: is this sort of turning out to be a blind spot for us in terms of our proactive cybersecurity measures? I'm talking about obviously the third party and supply chain security, which have been found to be severely lacking in these recent events. Is this a blind spot? Are we not prepared for this at all? What are your thoughts on this?
Absolutely. So look, third-party risk has been in our peripheral vision, and it's a known kind of area of risk, and we've seen many examples of third-party supply chain, software supply chain specifically, events play out in the past as well, right? I can go as far back as 2012, and in the Microsoft update, we had sort of a supply chain issue, and then we had so every couple of years we see this software supply chain third-party risk incidents manifest. Now, the reason we haven't really made progress in terms of our capability to address these issues is because we've squarely been focused on our own first-party security and moving the ball forward on that. So third-party always takes the backseat to first-party security, if you will. But having said that, in a digital world where everything is connected and it's I think we're coming and approaching a tipping point where call it third-party risk or nth-party risk is going to be a much larger facet of risk compared to first-party risk, right? Because if you think about it, the things hackers always want to take advantage of the things we are paying the least attention to, right? And the fact that we've ignored this issue of third-party risk for many years. The recent SolarWinds example is a perfect example that they were able to take advantage and frankly stay undetected for months, if not years, before the actual attack played out. So I think it's not a new issue. It's just been ignored for several years, and it's a very, very hard problem to solve, frankly, using traditional approaches.
Mm-hmm. So then, given the current scenario, what is your practical advice or strategy for any enterprise that is concerned by these events? I mean, I'm talking about both long-term as well as the sort of the knee-jerk. I mean, we are seeing a lot of the knee-jerk activities right now, and people are getting aware of these at least. I mean, that's fine, but in both terms, what could be your practical advice to enterprises for dealing with these?
Yeah, the first idea that comes to mind is, as we've always said, you can't manage something that you can't see or measure, I think it starts with the idea of inventory, right? So, as in the case of sort of first-party security, we always talk about, hey, inventory your assets, right? The assets that you're trying to protect and prioritize them, right? So similarly, in the context of third-party risk, you have to inventory all the connection points, the graph, if you will, of your connection into the outer world, right? And typically we've thought of it more in terms of our partners, both our supply and distribution chains. So we have to think on every aspect of the connection into our organizations, inventory them, and if nothing else, even subjectively, kind of rank them, give them a color code of, based on the reputation or based on kind of our previous interaction with some of those organizations, what we think about their security capabilities. So at least we have a map of all the possible points of risk, third-party risk that we have to manage. So before you manage the risk, you have to, bring that, shine the light on it and make it visible, right? At least at a very basic level. So that's sort of, my, sort of one-on-one level advice in terms of what we are to do. I think a knee-jerk reaction where you in this digital world, you can't really stop. You cannot survive without your supply chain or distribution chain, right? So you have to have, you cannot kind of go off the grid or anything like that. So you must remain connected, but you must inventory all the connections and begin to stack rank them in terms of the level of risk that those have.
Right. But I mean, yeah. So this sounds like this should be done. But then, do we have the adequate tooling or solutions already to deal with this, or do you think there needs to be more innovation here? Go ahead.
No, absolutely. I think the challenge is precisely that the traditional approaches of measuring third-party risk or third-party cyber risk, if you want to go even more granular, simply do not work, right? If you think about what we do when we think about assessing cyber risk, right? We look at the different systems. We look at the vulnerabilities in those systems. We look at the threat landscape and look at kind of the types of threats that are playing out. So, we do an asset and vulnerability inventory. We do a threat inventory and find the intersection of those two to kind of figure out, what's going on. But the issue with third-party cyber risk or third-party supply chain is because that environment is not in our control, right? So if you're sharing data with a partner organization, how do you know what level of security sophistication that partner has, right? And you cannot use your tooling to actually detect that. If you're concerned about software supply chain, you don't know how, in terms of the DevOps practices that the software manufacturer is using, whether they have done all the things to shift security left and done all the kind of the secure coding practices to make sure they're kind of ensuring there is no vulnerabilities in the system or there are no backdoors or sort of infiltrated code. So the reason traditional approaches don't work is for two reasons. One is the scale, right? This is an exponential scale, right? The number of connections I have is way more than sort of the assets I have. Suddenly I have to deal with the vulnerability landscape of many, many more assets than I traditionally did in my own world. So exponential problem in terms of just what we need to analyze, right? It's a data problem. That's point number one. Point number two is it's a jurisdiction problem, right? I don't have control over many of those assets, so I can't really do the things I would want to do to assess risk, right? That's problem number two. And problem number three really is the fact that, even if I were successfully able to detect some of these risks, the issue of remediating those, right? In terms of the speed at which you can remediate, even if you detect, in cybersecurity, as they say, you have to detect fast and you have to respond quickly.
Yeah.
Even if we were able to detect, the response cycle for third-party risk would be very slow. Yeah. So that's what the attackers are taking advantage of. Traditional approaches simply cannot work in this context.
Okay. So then the related question I think that you just touched upon was this growth in size and the types of our attack surfaces, not just ours, obviously. We are talking about the third party attack surfaces. Now, wherever your data goes, it's exposed to not just but your vendors or your partners' attack surfaces. I think you're hinting towards a sort of a more comprehensive inventory based approach. How do we bridge that gap? I mean, you spoke about jurisdiction as well. I think that to my mind comes as the first question. I mean, how do we bridge this gap? How do we, as a first party, get into visibility into the vendor's ecosystem or your partner's ecosystem?
Yeah, I think a few concepts come to mind, and I know some of those are near and dear to ThreadWatch's heart in terms of your approach. But a few core principles have to be adhered to. Number one, the solution must not require, it should be a loosely coupled model. It should not require intrusive agents or intrusive instrumentation to actually detect risk. Anytime you're asking that, hey, in order to detect risk here, you have to run a piece of code persistently in any system, simply does not work, right? So that's core principle one. Core principle number two is that you cannot rely on humans to curate and analyze this volume of data to actually look at and even prioritize incidents or risks in this area. This is not a problem that is tenable from a human analytics perspective, right? So you have to apply machine learning techniques to actually just process the vast volumes of data that are necessary. And then in terms of data privacy or jurisdiction and other things, I think what you have to do is you have to make sure that there is mechanisms to anonymize data or to deal with PII, PHI type concerns in terms of sort of the data that is needed from a risk basis that needs to be shared between organizations, right? So how do you have this graph of risk, if you will, where you are looking at all the connection points into your organization and without sharing any sensitive, quote unquote, sensitive data, establishing the risk profile, right? So lightweight, using sort of machine analysts as opposed to human analysts and then a much faster cycle and not requiring any code to be present in, because you don't actually own the systems that are in your third-party environments.
Right. So I think you're suggesting AI could play a big role in this as well, right? And beyond just the promise of AI that we've had so far, I think there's some real practical applications here that we can see. So in terms of the risk that I think I've heard you talk about digital risk quite a bit. Where does this rank in terms of the prioritization? Obviously, many threats that impact an organization have to be prioritized and have to be addressed in that order. Where does this stand? Where does third party and supply chain risk stand for you in an organization, or should stand?
Yeah, my sense is, and again, recency bias, look, we've all lived through a period of global pandemic, right? Yeah. And if you think about the post-COVID world, and kind of squint your eyes and reflect on what's changed and what will be permanent going forward, right? So one thing you can say is, look, we've all realized that work, play, and learning are activities, not places. Meaning, in terms of the things that we want to protect, which is data, is IP, which is kind of our humans that are participating, make sure their identities are not compromised or they're not phished, etc. All those things are now not, they could be working from anywhere, they could be learning from anywhere. So the idea of locality is no longer relevant.
Yeah.
The second thing we've learned is that any organization, COVID has accelerated digital transformation. Any organization that is more digitally capable actually fared better than an organization that was not. So the velocity of digital is only going to accelerate, meaning, you'll see more adoption of technology, even more connections and whatnot. So in terms of, back to your question, what are some of the highest priorities? I think in the cybersecurity world, all the cybersecurity technology that protects the edge as opposed to the core, right? So you think about core, cloud, edge. Traditionally we had boatloads of technology protecting the core, right? Because all the jewels were supposed to be in the core, but now the jewels are no longer inside the core and are now kind of beyond the boundaries. So, you're talking about cloud use cases, you're talking about sort of, people working working from home. So anything that lives on the edge, whether it be people or IoT systems or OT systems or cloud, that's where the action is going to be. So that's endpoint technology, identity access management, data security. Those technologies will be high priorities. The other area is this area of third-party cyber risk assessment, because as you try to become more digital, you have more digital connections with the outside world. So I would say this has got to be in the top 5, my list of top 5 priorities. I wouldn't say it's number 1 or anything, but it's in the top 5. With the edge kind of security tooling as well as third-party security would be amongst the highest priorities.
Right. So I think you partly answered my next question, which was this whole scenario that we have to deal, or we are actually dealing with now post-COVID, where the remote workforce is now sort of part of the problem, right? I mean, it's no longer it's basically become your third party due to the blurring of boundaries that we are seeing. So specifically there, do you see any? I know there's been a lot of chatter about solutions that are addressing security from an endpoint perspective for remote workforce, but specifically from as dealing with your remote workforce as your partner or your third party element. Do you see any developments there? Do you see any activity there that suggests that we are now moving towards this recognition that yes, there is going to be a significant part of our workforce which is going to be remote, and more of it is going to increase going forward, and we should treat it as we do our third party elements?
Yeah. So I think absolutely there is a general acceptance that there are different numbers out there, anywhere from 20 to 30% more of the employee population for organizations will be remotely enabled, meaning that they will not necessarily always work from home, but they'll be hybrid, right? They might come in to work, but many times they might opt to work from a remote setting, be it home or be it some other remote setting. So there is a lot of mindshare around quote unquote zero trust architectures, meaning, hey, you have to treat even your own employees or your own endpoints as sort of untrusted, and it's sort of a zero trust model where there is no trusted perimeter, and anybody who's inside is now trusted. There is no inside or outside. So a lot of zero trust thinking is getting a lot of mind share, and a general acceptance that this is the new norm going forward. Now, having said that, I would say that still doesn't fully address the third party issue. While it looks similar to your point, an employee who's working from a remote place is closer to being third party than first party, but it's still in a lot of cases using corporate devices. So you can have software on that is corporate sanctioned, etc. Yes, bring your own devices is a pattern, but if you think about the people working from home, a lot of them are actually using corporate sanctioned devices, right? So you still have some level of control on the software stack there. You have some visibility. You can place security instrumentation, and you can do the scanning and whatnot that you need to do. Whereas in third party, you absolutely cannot do that. So it must be a loosely coupled model. So yes, it is shifting the ball towards that third party thinking, but it doesn't fully address the issue as well, right? And on that, by the way, I was curious in terms of sort of, one of the use cases that you guys, as within ThreatWatch, that you guys have thought about a lot is the use case of third party risk, and in terms of a partner ecosystem for an organization, and how in a lightweight way, without having jurisdiction, without having control on those assets, bring about some visibility to the sort of the cyber risk.
Yeah.
So I thought it'd be very useful, Ketan, if maybe we kind of switch and if you can chime in with some thoughts on what is the ThreatWatch approach to dealing with this third party use case, and how does it kind of address some of the challenges that I kind of touched on?
Sure, sure. Yeah, so I think one of our focus has been to sort of treat the proactive security problems more comprehensively, and third-party security sort of falls nicely in that bucket. I think apart from the regular bread and butter vulnerability scans and your DevSecOps, etc. I think third-party security is equally important. Um, the innovation there has, I mean, to your point of the jurisdiction, I think we have tried to address the main problem of getting behind your partners or your vendors or your third parties firewall in order to get information, or in order to get true visibility of your of rather their ecosystems. And traditionally it has been sort of the outside in attempt, which I think has worked. I mean, it continues to work to a great extent. But for all the issues that we are seeing today, I think in terms of visibility, that barrier, that firewall needs to be crossed in a safe, acceptable, legal manner, so that information can be shared between third parties and customers, and everybody benefits from it. So it's kind of a I mean, I hate to use this very common term, but I think it's a win-win for both parties. I think there needs to be something there for the third party to get on board with this, and I think there is also this um, latent incentivization of the third party to participate in this risk management. It's not just a problem of the customer who's trying to work with a third party. It is also equally beneficial for the third party to be part of the solution. Um, and that way both parties get their fair share out of this. The third party gets uh, a window into their potential cyber exposure, and obviously the customer gets to make sure that their SLAs for third party security are addressed. So it's a kind of it's kind of a that's where the innovation and we have brought comes to bear, is to try and sort of jump into the vendor ecosystem and get visibility without really ruffling too many feathers, and breaking too many firewall issues or those kind of things. So that's the attempt that ThreatWatch has made so far, and I think we have some sort of some examples here to talk about that as well. But in here, I think we have managed to sort of prove that as a viable alternative, and we continue to test our way through it.
No, that's great, and that's, I think, while we've talked about in our conversation, Ketan, we've talked about third-party risk as a challenge.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, if there is a solution that aggregates the risk intelligence from this graph of interconnected businesses and organizations,
Yeah.
That intelligence, that community intelligence, can actually be a very powerful capability for the good guys, right? We've always had a lot of mind share in the cybersecurity industry around sharing threat intelligence data, right?
Mm-hmm.
If that same idea could be applied to vulnerability or risk intelligence, right, and sharing of that. So even if you go back to the SolarWinds example, right, the way it played out was one organization detects it, then it gets some news cycles, and then it drives sort of other organizations to start looking at it, and then suddenly it mushrooms out, right? And it's a very slow process. Whereas if there was this kind of sharing of anonymized information from an outside in approach as opposed to inside out, like you said, and there is a way to aggregate that sort of vulnerability intelligence or risk intelligence to look at things that are playing out in the graph of sort of the business graph of of the world, as opposed to each organization, right, as a silo. that would really increase the speed of detection of such incidents, right? It's
Right.
one is the severity of some of the and the potency of these attacks. The other is just the fact that it takes way longer than it should to actually detect them, right?
Right.
So I think applying some of those approaches, we can accelerate the detection if we do a better job of sharing vulnerability intelligence and have sort of things that are lighter weight. And then, by the way, and that does require that machine intelligence and AI to be applied, because this volume of data at the graph level will be exponentially larger than the volume of data at an individual organizational level, right? So
yeah.
yeah,
I agree. And yeah, I think what you're suggesting is sort of an exchange of an organizational level exchange of information, or a bank of data that can store this information about your vendors, partners, that can eventually be shared or exchanged between various organizations, and everybody benefits. Everybody knows everybody's security posture and can tweak their responses in order to work with each other. So yeah, I think that would be the next big thing, in my opinion, at least for us to look into and tackle. So yeah, definitely a great idea in there. Rohit, so one final question. I mean, I we see a lot of this. I mean, as part of our work at ThreatWatch, we see, uh, that's what we build ThreatWatch for, right? I mean, to basically curate vulnerabilities and threat intelligence using machine learning, and basically using machines rather than people. And it has been working great for us. But it also means that we are inundated with the latest and greatest threats and intelligence from all over the globe here. And while looking at that, it doesn't. I mean, the storm sort of seems to be ever growing. So, what is your sort of prognosis for the future? Is it still going to be a little bit of a winter for us before we get over this, or are there early signs of spring or summer that we can hope for in the near future?
Yeah, no, look, I'm encouraged with some of the recent progress around this idea of prioritization and risk management as a core underlying principle for cybersecurity, right? And a lot of it boils down to prioritization. We will never, using a pandemic analogy, we will not eradicate the virus. We have to just bend the curve, right? And that means we have to prioritize what we do. So the path to, I think, a more secure world is where we look at our systems, we look at all the vulnerabilities, figure out what vulnerabilities have been exploited in the wild. If every organization on a very expedient basis even addresses the vulnerabilities that are known and have been exploited, the known bad, take care of that, we would be a much more secure world. Right now, it's not a lot of hacks occur on the back of zero-day vulnerabilities, right? A lot of happen just on base of sort of known vulnerabilities that have already been exploited. Let's take care of those incidents,
right?
And then and then approach sort of a faster cycle of sort of looking at zero-day or some of the more sophisticated attacks. So it's back to the basics is what I'm espousing, and leverage the more modern technologies, but the underlying approach should be back to the basics, right? Simple principles of prioritization, knowing where your assets are, knowing what is more important to you, what needs to be protected, and then what are the highest sort of current threats and vulnerabilities that are typically being exploited right now, right? These things happen in batches. So if SolarWinds vulnerabilities is being exploited out there, let's kind of have a fast path to remediate that. Back to the basics is my headline summary for us.
Great. On that note, Rohit, that is, I think, all the time we have for this first edition of the virtual fireside chat. Thank you, Rohit, for spending time with us today and sharing your thoughts on this important area of concern for all of us who are related to this industry. Um, we will make this conversation available via our social media handles as well as on our website, threatwatch.io. Um, Listeners and viewers, please feel free to share, like, and subscribe to our handles on Twitter, LinkedIn, to receive updates on content like this. Hopefully, we'll be making more of this in the near future. Also, don't forget to visit our website to learn how ThreatWatch can help address the risks in third party and supply chain security, as well as other proactive security use cases. Thanks again for joining, Rohit, and we hope to have you again on this forum.
Very
Cheers.
good. Thank you. My pleasure.